Alright, so this is a spring job repair for a 16 by 7 2-car garage. It's an insulated door with windows. And what I'm doing right here is unwinding the right spring to remove all tension from that spring. As you can see on the left side actually is the broken spring. Even though that thing is still tied up or screwed onto the tube, it no longer has any tension. But the spring on the right side does have tension. So that was the spring that I have to remove the rest of the tension to remove it from the door. And this is in order for me to be able to work on the rest of the door, to start getting the springs off and then replacing them with the new ones. So right now what I'm doing is removing the bolts from the center bracket. The center bracket is what holds both springs together, and it helps to hold the tube and get the springs to work in unison. So now that we're going to the top left one, I still have to undo those bolts. They're not screwed through the tube, but they're screwed onto the tube. That way it has pressure to hold the springs. And once it has that pressure, those springs will be wound up, and that's what helps to wind the tube. But for right now, we're taking the springs off. Now that both springs are off, I'm actually going to the right side. I was thinking, you could see the stuff on the left.
What I gotta do is take out this drum
The client
right
has some bikes and scooters and more stuff on the left side of the garage door. Usually I ask them to clear a few feet from the garage so that I could work. And that's just so I don't damage anything that belongs to the customer. But since I was struggling on the right side, I wasn't able to pop out the tube from the right side. So now I'm kind of forced to clear out the left side. So I'm going to be very careful with these people's bikes and their scooters. I don't want to damage nothing. I don't want to break anything. So if you're an installer, you have to be careful with the client's belongings. You don't want to damage nothing. So there I go, rolling the bike back, making some space. And now I have enough space to work on the door from the left side. This was what they originally called me for. They told me that the cable was unwound from the left drum, which I'm working on right now. When they told me the cable came off of the left drum, usually, almost like 99% of the time, it's always going to be because the spring broke. And sure enough, this one was a broken spring. So here I go back on the right side. I was trying to pull the tube out, and you can see I'm trying to tug on the tube, but it's jammed. I don't know if it's because the previous installer, I don't know who this was. I don't know who installed this door, but the previous installer, I think they used an impact to screw on those bolts. It kind of damaged the tube, which made it harder to move it. Could have probably been the grease, could have probably been the grime, but I figured it's easier to get the tube out from the left side. I just banged it with the hammer a couple of times, and the tube popped out. So now I could just go back to the right, slide the springs right over, because now I'm gonna get everything out from the left side. That's gonna be the two springs, and then there between the two springs there's a little silver donut. I don't know what the actual name of it is, but it's a little round piece of hardware that goes between both springs. It usually goes into one spring. So now that I got the spring off, I don't want to just throw that spring to the ground, because then, you know, it's a pretty heavy spring. It's a chunk of metal. I don't want to just toss it to the ground and it probably cracks their, you know, the cement inside of the garage. So I'm just being very careful, taking off the springs, making sure I don't damage nothing. Slide it right over. Always hold the tube. You don't want the tube to just slide out. I know it didn't slide out earlier, but you know, stuff happens. We don't want accidents to happen. I just slide the spring with my left arm out, and I hold the tube with my right arm. You can see the spring just kind of dangling there. Now that I pulled it off, I put the tube back onto the track, just so I don't have to bring it all the way down and it doesn't roll or fall off. So there we go, we got the springs down. Taking a look at them, seeing if I catch anything out of the ordinary. And now it's time to install the new springs. These springs are always going to be marked with on each end with red or black. So for the right side, which is the first spring I'm putting on right now, is going to be the black spring. It's going to be marked with black on the end. So I'm sliding that in first from the left side. And the one with the bolts, the side with the bolts for this first one will be towards the right. Then I slide in the little donut, but it's kind of stuck right there. So I get the hammer, kind of tap it in. Because the tube is just a little bit down, I over tightened it. But it still works, it's still fine. They don't need to replace the tube. The tube will be just fine. And now we go get the other spring. And this spring that goes on the left side, that one's going to be marked in red. So now we slide this spring in. And once again, the side with the bolts for the left spring, the bolts will be on the left side. So there we go. Get the spring right on. Unwind the bolts a little bit to make sure it slides in. And then just slide it towards the center. But before I go towards the center, I want to put the drum back in. And then we put the tube back into the bracket. Make sure you got enough sticking out on both or on each ends of the bracket. It's about even. The right side has just a little bit more, but it's about even. So now I get the springs, and one spring will go on the right side of the center bracket, which is mounted on the wall, and the left spring will go mount on the left side of the bracket. So those bolts that I took off earlier, now I could put those bolts back on. And this is where you could use either some wrenches, you could use a socket and ratchet, or you could use an impact. Since the bolts for the middle bracket has to be really tight, I use the impact. Alright, once you get those two bolts on there tight, which connects both springs and connects it to the center bracket. Now what we want to do is go to one side of the door to start winding up the drum. You could go do the left side or the right side, it doesn't really matter as long as you do one. In this situation, the coil or the cable got pinched by the door. So part of the cable is outside in front of the door and it's pinched between the door and the wall. I'm kind of struggling to pull out the cable. So a solution I came up with was to undo some of the screws from the top panel. And that way I could pull back on the panel by itself. And then I can unpinch the cable. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes, you have to loosen things up. It's going to be a little bit of extra work just to get the cable or get whatever to work properly. In this situation, I got the cable unstuck from the top, but it's still pinched in the center of the door. So I just pull that cable back in. And once I pull the cable back in, I can go work on the drum. This is where you put the cable in the slot of the drum. Once you put the cable in the slot of the drum, then you could go ahead and wind the drum and the cable will wind on the drum. So now that I got it all tightened up, we're gonna put some vice grips because we don't want the tube to move. I know when I first started doing this, I would get confused as to which vice grip I needed to put on. I mean, where do I put it, on the top or on the bottom? Very important where you have it, but in case you forget or you can't remember, I know I would always forget. I just got so used to putting two vice grips, one on the top and the second vice grip on the bottom. Now for sure I know that tube is not moving. So now I go back to the drum and I'm tightening the bolts for that drum. This drum is going to have the cable already wound on it and it should have tension. We're going to repeat the process on the right side. I'm going to get the cable. I pull the drum all the way against the right side. I put the cable in the slot and then you're going to wind the drum. That way it has tension on the cable. So once there's tension on the cable, you want to go ahead and screw on the bolts for that drum. So I'm holding it with my extension bar. And then I'm tightening it with my fingers at the moment. And once it's finger tight, I grab my wrench. And then I tighten it some more to make sure it's secure. Not too much because you don't want to damage the tube. The tube already has a little bit of damage, but it's not that bad. I don't want to make it any worse. That's one reason I use wrenches. I don't like using an impact on those bolts, because with the impact, you're more likely going to damage the tube a lot easier. With the wrench, you could feel the tension and the pressure with your wrist, and you more or less get an idea of when to stop. So once both drums are set, the cables have tension, we go to the middle springs. And this is where I start winding the spring. This is going to be the most dangerous part, where you got to be very careful with these springs. As you keep winding up the spring, you're adding more and more tension to that spring. And you could feel it on the bars as you're winding it. Like, it just wants to, if it slips out of your hand, it's going to kick back so fast.
Thank you.
I've never seen this happen, but I've heard stories where those bars hit people in the head or hit them on the face. That is the most dangerous part of this repair. You don't want to get hit by those bars. So every time I do this, I make sure I have gloves, because if I use my hands, usually the sweat builds up on my hands and it gets a lot slipperier, and that's a greater chance for me to, an accident to happen. So now that the right spring is wound, I'm winding the left spring. And you're going to want to do 31, not full turns, but there's 3 slots on these springs. You put this shaft, you put either the winding bar or some bar in there, and you wind it 1. You put it in the next slot, wind it up 2. Put it on the 3rd slot, wind it up 3, and you just keep winding up to 31 winds. Sometimes it's a little too much, so later on when we test it, we'll check if we have to unwind some of that tension. Okay, now that I have both springs bolted in, I'm going to go ahead and remove the vice grips because we're about to test the door. I want to see if the door will lift. So now that we have tension on that tube, I almost forgot. I get my winding bar, put it in the slot, and I give it a little tug. And sure enough, it doesn't feel heavy. So that's good. Now, we want to go ahead and test the door and see how it feels when I'm lifting it up. Right there, it's trying to go all the way up by itself. It's pretty much trying to fly up, which is not good. That means I put too much tension on the springs. So when I said I did 31, that was just a little bit too much for the door. So you can see I'm trying to pull it down, but the door's trying to go back up by itself. I'm trying to leave it at a quarter open and the door is still trying to go up by itself. So that means I definitely have to unwind quite a bit of tension. So I just go back to the springs. I make sure to put my vice grips on the tube before I work on the springs. Because if I don't put the vice grips, the tube is just going to spin. And then I'm going to have to redo all the work of winding the cables and the drums and both springs. So before I remove any tension from that spring, I put both vice grips to make sure that tube don't move. So now I unwind 3/4 of a turn on each spring on the left side, and then I unwind 3/4 of a turn on the right side. So basically, instead of 31 turns on each spring, it's more like 28 to 29 winds. Now that I changed the tension, take off my vice grips, and we test the door one more time. Okay, it feels good. I take a look around, everything is looking good. And now what I want to check most importantly is that the door doesn't fly up by itself. I want to see, can the door hold at a quarter open? It does. Now sometimes, homeowners like to keep the door partially open. And you want the door to be able to hold at that position. So right there it's at halfway open and it holds by itself. Perfect. And the door runs smoothly. So that means it has a perfect amount of tension. The last thing to check though, as I'm looking around at all the cables, the tension, making sure everything's right, you also want to make sure it's not too hard to pull the door down. And when you're pulling it down, don't pinch your fingers between the panels. That happens sometimes. Okay, so now that everything feels good, up and down it feels good, we're going to test the opener to make sure the opener can lift and close the door just fine. So, okay, everything looks good. The door is moving up really well. Perfect. Now let's test the garage door opener closing the door. I want to make sure that nothing gets jammed. I don't hear no weird noises. And everything is just running smoothly. And it does. So we test it one more time. You always want to test it a couple of times. Don't get crazy on testing it too many times because you could overheat the motor. And then you're going to have to wait to let it cool down. And now this is a little sensitivity test. I ran towards the door as it was going down, and I put pressure on the door as it's coming down, and I want to see that the door goes back up. And it does. And that's the whole point of that, is to check if the door comes down. If it hits a car or something, it's going to go back up. And that's it. That's how you fix a spring.